Every brick laid in the foundation of Catherine's new authority is a brick removed from the house Camilla spent decades trying to build. Failed ultimatums, transferred jewels, military audiences handed to a daughter-in-law instead of a wife. By the time Camilla reportedly demanded written guarantees for her remaining status, the answer she received was a cold professional rejection. The countdown on her influence had already begun, and the person who started the clock was the one man she believed would never turn against her. But to understand how the monarchy reached this breaking point, you have to go back to the moment Charles made a decision that rewrote every rule the crown had ever followed. The declaration that shook the palace. In the early weeks of April 2026, King Charles III did something unprecedented. In a televised address that will likely be studied for decades, he formally and publicly elevated Catherine, Princess of Wales, to a position no royal spouse had ever been granted, while the sitting monarch's own wife still held her title. He did not simply praise her. He named her the central pillar of the British state and the guardian of the monarchy's visual majesty. Not Camilla. Not another senior royal. Catherine. The words were chosen with surgical precision. Charles described her as the person who had secured the horizon of the monarchy, ensuring a clear and undisputed line of succession stretching into the 22nd century through her 3 children. He praised her motherhood not as a private virtue, but as a supreme constitutional obligation. He framed her parenting of Prince George, the future king, as a masterclass in character formation that would protect the throne from the psychological fractures that had historically weakened Windsor men. Every sentence carried a double meaning. Every compliment to Catherine cast a shadow that landed squarely on Camilla. The subtext was devastating in its clarity. The king was not simply thanking his daughter-in-law. He was announcing to the nation and the world that the future of the monarchy was already being built around her, and it was being built at the direct expense of the woman currently wearing the consort's crown. The jewels that told the real story. Nothing in the monarchy speaks louder than the distribution of its jewels. These are not accessories. They are instruments of statecraft, symbols of legitimacy, markers of who holds the real power behind the ceremonial curtain. And in the spring of 2026, Charles transferred the most significant pieces in the royal collection directly to Catherine, bypassing Camilla entirely. The Cartier halo tiara, worn by Catherine on her wedding day, was granted to her as permanent personal property. The Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, the iconic crown that has appeared on banknotes and stamps for decades, was entrusted to her care. The legendary Romanov Kent collection was handed to Catherine, not by the king himself, but by the Duke of Kent, who chose to bypass the Queen Consort and place these historical treasures directly into the hands of the next generation. In the language of royalty, this was not a gift. It was a verdict. Every piece that landed in Catherine's possession was a piece that would never define Camilla's legacy. The message was clear enough for the entire institution to understand without a single confrontation being necessary. Catherine was being designated as the true visual representative of the crown. Not the woman who currently held the consort title, but the woman who would carry its meaning forward. Building a king from scratch. The elevation was not based on jewels alone. Charles publicly credited Catherine with something far more consequential than wearing the right tiara at the right event. He credited her with reshaping how the monarchy raises its future sovereigns. For generations, royal heirs were handed to nannies and governesses and raised at a deliberate distance from their parents. Catherine demolished that model entirely. She became the primary architect of Prince George's character, personally guiding his introduction to the enormous responsibilities awaiting him while fiercely protecting his right to a normal childhood. Football matches, cooking together, household chores. She insisted on building a future king who could lead a state ceremony with gravity and then talk to an ordinary person with genuine warmth. Charles described this approach as a strategic defense mechanism for the monarchy itself. By ensuring that George, Charlotte, and Louis grew up emotionally stable and psychologically resilient, Catherine was actively preventing the personal crises that had damaged Windsor men across generations. She was not just raising children. She was building a healthier institution from the ground up, starting at the most fundamental level possible. Her work extended beyond her own household. The Royal Foundation Center for Early Childhood, created in 2021, and her Shaping Us campaign brought neuroscientists and policymakers together around the principle that the first 5 years of life determine the long-term health of society. She took what she had learned as a mother and translated it into national policy, earning a seat at the table of serious governance that no amount of ribbon cutting could have produced. The stateswoman without a crown. Catherine's influence had expanded well beyond domestic policy by the time Charles made his declaration. In September 2025, she led a high-profile delegation to the United Nations for a summit on early childhood development. Her performance was commanding enough that international media began calling her an uncrowned stateswoman. Back home, she held private audiences with senior officers of the household cavalry, building direct relationships with the military establishment that traditionally reported through the monarch alone. She took on patronages across the arts, sports, and armed forces, not as ceremonial decoration, but as platforms to reinforce the concept of duty at a time when the working royal family had shrunk dramatically. William publicly introduced her as his partner in every sense of the word, at home, in the family, and in their shared work for the nation. That language was deliberate. It positioned them not as heir and spouse, but as a dual sovereign unit already functioning as the operational center of the monarchy. The formal title had not changed. The reality behind it had transformed completely. What Camilla lost without anyone saying it. Every honor Catherine received functioned as a quiet subtraction from Camilla's standing. This was not accomplished through confrontation or public humiliation. It was achieved through the relentless accumulation of transferred authority, redirected symbols, and reassigned responsibilities that gradually hollowed out the traditional power of the Queen Consort from the inside. Camilla understood the mechanics of what was happening. Her presence and authority were inextricably linked to the reign of Charles. As long as he sat on the throne, she held her position. But every move he made to anchor the monarchy to Catherine was simultaneously a signal that when William ascended, Camilla's role would not simply diminish. Observers noted her response: pointed silences at shared events, withdrawal from certain ceremonial occasions following the most significant jewel transfers. Reports surfaced of failed ultimatums where she sought written guarantees for her remaining status, only to be met with professional rejection from the king's advisory team. The door she was trying to hold open was closing incrementally, and the person pushing it shut was the husband she had stood beside through decades of public hostility. The internal friction did not slow Catherine's momentum. If anything, it clarified the trajectory. The Duke of Kent choosing Catherine over Camilla for the Romanov collection was not a personal slight. It was a family making a generational bet. The older branches of Windsor were placing their legacy in the hands of the direct line of succession, and Camilla was not part of that line. The countdown, she cannot stop. By mid-2026, the picture had become unmistakable to everyone inside and outside the palace. The monarchy was being restructured around Catherine with a precision that left no room for ambiguity. She held the jewels. She held the military relationships. She held the diplomatic portfolio. She held the public's trust at a level no other member of the family could match. And she held the full endorsement of both the reigning king and the future one. For Camilla, the mathematics were brutal. Every year that passed brought the transition closer. Every new responsibility Catherine assumed widened the gap between the present order and the future one. Charles had made his strategic calculation openly. He had chosen to trade the present tense influence of his wife for the future tense stability of